Hey there, welcome to episode 51 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording this at 1:38 p.m. on Thursday, November 14th, 2024. I'd like to say it was earlier, but it is not. I actually it's been a busy week. Today's episode, Pick a Path, will be about exactly that. We'll talk about that soon enough. In the meantime, if this is the first time you've joined this audio program, a work already in progress, first of all, we're coming up on the end of the first season, which is, of course, season 0, because programmers start counting at 0. Zero indexing is the only way to go, really. Second, if you're not familiar with the expression that FFS abbreviates, I'll give you a hint. It's Irish, or it's something that Irish people say frequently, and if you are not familiar with it, you need to hang out with more Irish people. FFS Talk is a program about what works, what does not, and what we can do about it. It's meant to be constructive, ideally dialogue or conversation, but mostly monologue. In fact, all monologue for all of these episodes in Series 0, Season 0. Hopefully season 1 will see some interest in conversation. So we'll see about that. So this, on the 14th, that means the final episode of the year. I'm sorry, of the season, not the year. Final episode of the season, episode 52, will be published on Thanksgiving. So I will not expect people to listen to it at that time. But we'll see if I can come up with something interesting for that particular episode. And then season 1 will begin the following week, so this is really just administrative. In the meantime, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you have found the episode description, which contains the show notes and a couple of links. I have not created a link-rich episode today. There's no additional reading to do. In fact, I'm going to read brief definitions of 2 words, so you don't even have to look those up. You still could. Sometimes my episodes are link heavy because I want to have some references, and not only for the episode as I'm recording it, but if I can pronounce words, but in the future, it is entirely possible that I could point to an episode that I've published, and you can hear where I got information from at the time. It's kind of a point in time snapshot. So that's what that's about. Thus, let us begin the show notes with the summary, which I will read to you now, tangentially related to the recent election outcomes. But more generally, this is about selecting a goal or a collection of goals to accomplish based on principles, rather than on politics or other power, money, etc. This will be the topic throughout this episode, and so I've already edited my summary on the fly. Rather than politics or something else like power or money. There we go. Sometimes I can't type, sometimes I can. The links for today's episode are the usual shameless self-promotion. I will point out right up front, no money is expected. You don't have to spend anything. But I do use the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page to hold my links and other useful information about my various projects. I am hoping to add about 2 more less frequently published programs about some specific projects or initiatives, really. And maybe a third, we'll see, and it kind of dovetails off of the entrepreneurial project initiative. I guess that's more of a project in the normal sense, that ideally will get up and running really soon. Those are code words for not really sure when. So buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo for updates and links. It's kind of a link page to various projects. And I do also link to some of the coffees that I purchased, the beans. And generally speaking, any money that does arrive through either of these 2 shameless self-promotion links does go towards coffee, which is what powers all of this. The other link, of course, ko-fi.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Dan Hugo in both cases, no spaces, DANHUGO. I pronounce it Ko-fi to emphasize that it is 2 words, KONFI. Technically, I could say Fi, I guess. Ko-fi, ko-fi.com. ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. This is more of you can post short updates very easily, so I'm going to start doing that. I've kind of taken the plunge, and I have updated both of these platforms for my accounts, my profiles, my posts in the last couple of days. And I've mentioned this in at least one other audio program. I'm toying with the idea of doing a little audio update that is only published on one of these, and I believe it will be easier to publish it on buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. So I might do a quick rundown for anyone who's curious and just try that out. And then I can link to it on Ko-fi.com. So anyone who's visiting either or both would see those. Kind of a little between you and me thing. So we'll see. I'm not trying to promote those brands. You're not required to go to these, but I do know that some people use both of these profile platforms, especially open source projects. They post an about page or an update, and then right there at the bottom, support this project, buy me a coffee, or Ko-fi.com. They'll put their link to their profile, and sometimes that's how they buy their coffee. So that's where that is. And now on with the show. So when I say pick a path, we're talking about where you're headed, what you're doing. It could be about life, could be about business, could be whatever your politics are. Maybe you're involved with your community, those people that are near you, or maybe a larger community like your county, or maybe your city or town. Could be anything. So how do you figure out where you're going and how you're going to get there? So let's compare the notions of policy versus principle. First things first, there are policies and there are principles. Sticking with principles is often the challenging part of anything, while changing policy is something we see frequently, and we do it. We do it frequently. This can still be disruptive and expensive sometimes, but policy changes are ideally something that we can implement to continue principled pursuits in the face of changing circumstance. Once again, I don't know who types my notes up. Somebody's controlling my hands and typing incorrect letters now and then. And everybody does a policy change. So they don't call it a policy change, but your principles might be, I'm going to pursue healthy diet, healthy eating. Your policy change on purchasing certain items from a grocery store, like, hey, I'm going to buy 18 eggs a week, and eggs have doubled in price. Okay, I'm going to have to change how I construct this healthy diet. I don't want to eat less healthy. I'm not making a principle change. I'm making a policy change in how I get there. So I might just have to eat fewer eggs. I'll try to get alternate protein sources or somehow make it work. So policy changes will sometimes be interlinked with other policy changes. I have to spend more money on eggs, and I'm picking eggs on purpose because eggs are all the rage now. And I will say, a little personal interruption here. My local Kroger grocery store, Kroger wants to be a monopoly, and I'm guessing that their merger with Albertsons will now go through with the recent change in the political wind, and that's unfortunate because, as it is, Kroger has already admitted to their own dalliances with their pricing policies. Their principles apparently are earn as much money as possible from customers. Forget what we tell them. My 18 egg carton price has doubled in the last, I want to say 10 days. It might be 7 days. Not quite doubled. It was $3.49 and now it's $6 plus. So almost doubled, but not quite. That's impressive. Principles, when you think about it, should not change. Not really. There's a time and a place, but really, for the most part, your principles should remain unchanged. Why did you start your company? Why did you join an organization? Maybe as a board member or something. Why do you do many things? Why did you have kids or get married if you did? Either or both of those things. Why did you move to a certain area? Why did you, like when you when you select an area to relocate, to move, it is often for work. So you may love a place, but if your job goes somewhere else, you may have to leave or you may want to stay. So that one's a little bit softer, but why do we do certain things? What is our motivation? And if it is a principled motivation, if it is something that is meaningful to us, our own ethos, our own deeply held beliefs, or just the way we view the world, why do you do these things when you have where you do have choices and options. It's possibly because of your principles, right? By the way, the principle in our dictionary, one definition, there's another definition for like chemistry or science principles. But here we're selecting a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. So it's literally why. Why would I do certain things? When the circumstances that you, your family, friends, perhaps your company, maybe your employees, if it's your company, your colleagues at that company, wherever, are facing the circumstances that you're facing begin to change. So you could be on the precipice of some big, economic shift, market shift. From the business side, it could be, hey, I had a house fire. Sometimes you have a house fire, you gotta make a big drastic change because circumstances have changed very quickly, sometimes slowly. It may be necessary to change your policies or how you pursue your principles. So policy, same dictionary, a course or principle of action. I don't like that principle appears in the definition, but that's the way it is. A course or principle of action adopted or proposed by a government, party, business, or individual. That's it. A policy is very simple. It's a course. It's a principle of action. How am I going? I'm totally making this part up, but it's how am I going to construct action, or you could say, how am I going to adapt my reasoning in that chain of reasoning? How am I going to apply what I need to do with what my fundamental core beliefs or purpose are? When you form a nonprofit, for example, you have to have a purpose statement. I think you have to do it for I don't know if you have to do it for a normal. Anyway, when we formed our Innovate for Vegas Foundation, the purpose statement, you want to keep it sort of vague, but directional. Our purpose statement is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. We did not say what we were going to ideate, innovate, or implement. We just said that the end goal is to do these things to make our communities better. We didn't necessarily say they were our local communities. It could be any community anywhere because we're all kind of a global community, right? But you do hopefully get the sense that our goal, our mission, our purpose statement, as is on file with the Secretary of State of the fine state of Nevada, is exactly as I said it. You get the idea that we are not in the business of trying to make money from selling technology products or anything. And, we're probably not going to try to make money anyway as we are a Nevada nonprofit corporation. But the take home is our principles, as we've spelled out in our purpose statement. That's not the entire collection of principles. But one of the driving principles is to try to accomplish community elevation in the efforts that we enable and encourage. Pretty straightforward. Our policies can change. We were initially interested in having as many people participate as possible. That is completely impractical, and it doesn't scale well because we are not in the business, small b, of trying to recruit people or trying to convince people. We're not marketing our message like, hey, here's what's, there is some here's what's in it for you, but it's really, some of that motivation has to come from within. So our policy on outreach and engagement for potential civic volunteers has changed over the last 2 years to be much more about personal motivation. So our messaging can be more clear about here's what we're trying to accomplish rather than do you want to be a part of this, right? So we're trying to attract a different type of personal motivation, for example. So that's a change in policy. It doesn't change in the slightest what our principles are regarding what we're trying to accomplish. And I think that sometimes gets lost, which is sort of the topic of this episode. So I had to get some water there. Hang on. And yes, voice is still arguing with me. When we get into trouble, though, this is where we can run into some eyebrow raising. If we have our principles and we find that circumstances are changing so that we need to implement a change in policy, what would happen if we find it easier or advantageous to just change our principles instead? Remember, we may find ourselves in a position where we need to consider changing our principles or our fundamental truths or beliefs about something rather than considering a change in the course that follows our existing principles. So that is the crux of it. If we are at that crossroads, what to do? There are historical events, changes in public morality. There are changes in sort of the official, legal constraints and so on. You could look at things just in America's history regarding the taking of lands from people that were already there. That's not called discovering. You can look at certain labor that was foisted upon others for no compensation. I'm trying to keep this show simple. There are some bad things. Some of the principles that led to these actions or these accepted norms had to change over time. And luckily they sort of have for most, hopefully. Fingers crossed. So principles like inviting people to come to this country. And I don't want to make this political, but there's a certain, you get the Statue of Liberty, the plaque famously inviting people in, a nation of immigrants and so on. So one of the fundamental principles is somewhere in there about the melting pot and all that. So occasionally there will be a desire to change things that may or may not be popular to change. Sometimes making a change in principles. Did I say policies? Principles. Making a change in principles. Sometimes it's just like, why was that ever not the case? Why did we ever allow these things? And it could be a local principle about favoring certain business. You could say, for example, in your neighborhood, in your town, production by street, in your neighborhood of town, maybe there are schools, maybe there are young people receiving an education, hopefully. There may be one of the fundamental principles is to keep children safe. Now, you're probably guessing where I'm going to go with this, but no, I'm going to say that occasionally there will be a zoning ordinance or some other constraints on where stores, retail outlets, or certain types of businesses are allowed to be within a certain range of a school, especially like an elementary school. And sometimes it'll be something like 1,500 feet or 2,000 feet or something, and that's not even a half a mile, quarter mile, give or take, right? So here you're basically saying within this range, we must keep out any notion of adult bookstores, liquor stores, anything along the lines of like an adult-oriented business. You don't want children to go to those places. You also don't want them to be near those places where, obviously, horrible people would patronize these places, of course. So in the name of protecting children, which I'm not against, I'm not trying to stack up an argument here, but there are these constraints placed. Now, there's another principle it's the same principle that unfortunately got caught up with mobile vending. They said, ice cream trucks cannot go into that same radius because you run the risk of young children crossing a street without looking to go to get some ice cream, and they may get hit by a car and so on. So the principle of trying to protect children in a school, there's nothing inherently wrong with that at all. But one of the policies that was enacted then was that ice cream trucks cannot operate nearby. Now, that becomes sort of impractical when you apply the same policy to all forms of mobile vending. So when you call food trucks a ice cream truck, suddenly they are also not allowed to, say, vend if there's a small business or an event nearby a school, and there's going to be, you cannot vend on the streets. You cannot be a part of this event because the radius of a non-operation for certain types of business around a school. So sometimes principles need to be adapted to, or principles are fine. The policies are the things that need to change. At no time should somebody say, we don't need to protect children anymore. So let the liquor stores and let the market decide if they want to open a liquor store or operate a food truck across the street from a school. We'll just cross our fingers and look the other way. So there is a difference between policy and principle, and the number of times you have to change your principles will almost certainly be small. The number of times you have to change policies will probably be either large or at least larger to adapt to existing circumstances, the present day, and so on. Principles can be established way back at the beginning. And if they remain, if they hold true, if they were founded in the correct frame of mind and social consciousness, they may endure. A policy might have to change. Policies about telegraph operation would have to adapt to the modern era of, I guess, sort of a different form of telegraph with your cable modems and DSL and whatnot, not to mention wireless and the internets. So you're transmitting ones and zeros, dits and dashes. No, what is it? Is it dit and dash? I can't remember. Dot and dash, but short and long pulses. So, okay, zeros and ones. But some policies had to adapt. The principles of fair communication and whatnot may remain. So I didn't really do a deep dive on how FCC regulations have applied to telegraphs versus wired communications and so on, but you get the idea. Generally speaking, when principles remain fairly constant, maybe reliable, people around you, maybe they are your colleagues and friends, maybe your customers, maybe other businesses that you want to work with, maybe other countries, will more easily tolerate policy changes. You got to have a price increase? Well, we want to keep our employees employed without layoffs or pay cuts. So like always, so we need to stay in business to continue to pay our employees, and prices are generally going up. So we have to pay our employees more. We're going to have to charge you another $1 for your latte. And people are often okay with that because they realize, okay, well, times are what they are. It's not like the company's decided we're going to try to cheat you in some way, or we're going to favor profits. Oh, we're going to lay off 25% of our workforce and raise prices because it's all about profit. So there are different ways to go there if you remain principled in your day-to-day, if your practices are transparently compliant with what you've set out to do and people understand that, then policy changes are not awful usually. Sometimes. Depends on which podcast you go on. Well, with some transparency and communication, customers will likely accept that. They won't necessarily like it, but if you are honest with your customers or your friends or your colleagues, here's the situation and so on. I think it was, it might have been Toyota. I know it was a company in Japan. I think it was Toyota, but there may have been some other. There many years ago, it made the news. Instead of having layoffs, they essentially reduce pay across the board, and then they offer retraining for their employees. So the idea is we want to stay in business. We don't want to have to shut our doors and send people home. So we're going to have everyone participate in the continued health of the company and its employees. And then along the way, we're going to upskill. We're going to train and offer additional education and elevate skill levels and so on. That is an interesting take. That is a principled take. Sometimes a principle is we're going to make as much money for our shareholders as possible, and that's just the way it is. So your policy might be more layoffs, more bonuses to the CEO. These are just different choices. Of course, a mysterious price increase can be attributed to inflation. That's another way to go. Whether that's correct or not, maybe you're just gouging, Kroger. More examples. So we saw this in the open source software world, which may be a bit of inside baseball for some, but generally speaking, when a project becomes popular and even essential, especially if you started your project as an open source project. So, hey, we're going to be an open source thing, and we're going to share our code, and we're going to accept contributions from others, and we're going to make the world a better place with what we're doing. And it becomes very popular and even essential. Company behind the project, there might be an actual company. Sometimes there isn't, sometimes there is. So if there's a company behind the project, they might decide to change their licensing of their open source wares and remove some of the collaboration and reuse options that were originally enabled. So business source licensing versus GPL or MIT or Apache or BSD, etc. So a business source license changes the way that you can use the software. Open source software, by its very nature, really tries to not do that. So if you change, that's kind of a principle change, right? They likely see this as a policy change. Everyone else in the world views this as a something of an affront, an insult, because it is a fundamental change to the principles adopted by those thriving in the open source environment. They've decided to change the rules pull the rug. People who have come to depend on the open source nature of this particular project, it's an essential part of what we're trying to accomplish. We're all trying to add value to the world by doing our, working on our various projects, contributing to other projects, collaborating, and so on. In a perfect world, everybody wins, but there are times, especially if investment is involved in any way, hey, we need to prevent people from making money on our efforts. Now, you might ask yourself, hey, are you guys using open source compilers and platforms and languages to... Interesting. I don't know if anybody really delves into that, but one of the principles that can be violated here is, hey, we're going to be a part of this general approach to how things work. And then at some point you say, oh, we're going to only do that as far as it benefits us and too bad for everybody else. And even if that is not what's going on in their board meeting or wherever they make these decisions, that is often how it is seen. And then you will see people rapidly develop a competitor. Sometimes they'll take the very open source components that are still available under the open source license. They'll do what's called a fork. And they'll say, okay, well, we're going to develop our own version of this, and it's going to stay open source software without the business source license. So, it's almost like a little revolution. Obviously, our current collection of principles on which the United States was founded, and they have changed over the decades and centuries with a few solid fundamentals. I've kind of alluded to some of those, although I don't want this to be about politics or U.S. history, although a lot of things are. These might inflict substantial change on our society and our standing in the world, but these are still early days. The question is whether the election of 2024 was about policies or principles. It might be that not everyone was voting on the same perspective or from the same perspective, but we will find out soon enough. So some people were voting for policy changes, too much inflation, I want to see price reductions. Some people are voting for principle changes, like I don't want people coming here from other places. There are different views. Sometimes you can implement things through policy changes. You could definitely change inflation with a principle change. Okay, we're moving away from capitalism. It's now centrally planned, a socialist style marketplace. So pricing will be set by a central planning authority and top-down management and so on. So that is another way to go. So that would be a change in the fundamental principles of what is otherwise a capitalist system. You'd say, we're changing that. But if you change policies, like, okay, we're going to add some tariffs for some reason, or those have been around. Those are nothing new. So you implement a tariff policy, maybe you implement a price fixing policy, which was another suggestion from the losing side of this election. You can make these policy changes that fit within the framework of the principles that govern the operation of the system. So you don't have to change from capitalism to socialism in the economic marketplace. You can just implement price controls. You'll see this in localities where they have rent. What do they call it? Rent control. So those are essentially rent caps, right? So you can set pricing caps. You can set a lot of centrally planned pricing changes, but those are often not ideal. And that's where you can look through your history book and see that central planning in general is difficult to scale, especially over a large geographical area with many different regional considerations and so on. So it's a big undertaking to change something like that. Ponder a big, well-known brand like Starbucks, though. Let's pick something a little bit more reasonable that we don't have to worry about who voted for what in this case. They consider themselves a premium retail establishment. Wherever they are found, selling premium products. They sell premium beans. I don't know about that, really. They're specified to meet their pricing requirements and flavor profiles, perhaps, but are they premium? Who knows? But they sell premium products. They try to call them that anyway. I've never purchased a mug at Starbucks, but maybe they're good. Don't know. Their principles, which they actually publish on their website in their mission and values. So if you look for Starbucks mission and values, you'll land there. Are essentially unchanged as they make changes to prices, product offerings, promotions, and so on. This has been in the news in the past 2 weeks or so. So it sounded interesting to me because it is possible to make non-trivial policy changes regarding in this current example. So this is topical within the last 2 weeks. October 24th, I think, was the article that I read. they're making changes, non-trivial changes, discontinuing pricing discounts on their products, which might turn some customers away. Like, oh, they're raising their prices. Well, they're just removing discounts. So, versus turning the brand and its establishment into something that it is not. So they're not changing their fundamental principles. They're saying maybe discount pricing is not working for our customers because we're the same customer. I'll touch on this more in a moment, but we're not really reaching. We're not achieving what we set out to do with these pricing discounts. So we'll come up with some other way to recognize brand loyalty. This is a common approach: loyalty programs, loyalty points, clubs, etc., without putting their quarterly bottom lines, right? Their margins that they make day to day and month and quarterly and so on. They don't have to offer these discounts when they can offer some points in a loyalty program, and that's a future benefit. So they have deferred a benefit to their customers into the future while capturing more margin in the present. So that's beneficial for their business. And in the face of, I believe they have a new CEO now who's got a different policy on working from home, which I think is hard to do if you work in a Starbucks. But I believe he's going to be flying the jet to work or something. I don't know. That's a different set of principles, perhaps. So they've changed their model of benefit to their customers for the sake of business. But if you flip through their principles, you want me to do that right now? Real quickly, I will go. I'm here. I got the page open anyway. With every cup, with every conversation, with every community, we nurture the limitless possibilities of human connection. Basically, they offer coffee shops where you can bring your laptop and hang out and do some work with your earbuds in, conversations, stop by for lunch or whatever. Our values: when we show up at our best, we deliver performance through the lens of humanity. So I suppose they want to be judged on what they actually offer to people in general. And I'm going to suggest that they actually are also interested in what people have to say who don't patronize the store. Like, what impact do they have on the place where they do business? I've heard some stories about this, but who knows? So they got some little cards with like craft and courage, results, belonging, joy. They promote a culture of connection, belonging, growing, social impact. So these are all reasonable. There's nothing in here about pricing or discounts or market share or profit margins. So when you can separate what you're trying to accomplish on your balance sheet versus what you're trying to accomplish in the world, you're probably going to see somebody who has a plan based on their principles, not on profit motive, for example. Now, what about pivots? It is not unreasonable to pivot. This is often a change in policies for the sake of, say, financial survival of a company, or maybe some drastic change in life circumstances that force a re-examination of near-term plans and goals. You'll often see with a startup, which I'll mention in a moment, but a new startup or a very early days, we had to pivot into a completely different product, or just a big change, right? There may be, on personal notes, you might see in the news that some, especially celebrities, do this a lot. They got married for 28 days and then they got divorced. That seems like a troubling pivot, except that when you really think about it, isn't it better to pivot now than much later, when there's going to be a lot more damage to clear from such a pivot? If you have ever had an idea for a new business, call it a startup or your side hustle or whatever, and you determine that your initial idea needs some fine-tuning or radical change, could be anything. In these early days, change is to be expected. No point in launching a stinker, same goes with those 28-day marriages, that will fail when you can pivot and launch something that might fail. Surely this idea will fail, but this other idea might fail. Pivots can lead to better outcomes or less worse outcomes. But if you see the possibility for a pivot and you find yourself thinking, maybe it makes more sense to pivot. There's an example I just was reading in a book. It wasn't a book about Intel, but it was an Intel example of Andy Grove and what's his first name? Robert Noyce. Gordon Moore and Robert Noyce were talking about the memory marketplace and how it was dragging Intel down in its very early days. And they were trying, like, what should we do about memory? And I believe it was, I think it was Gordon Moore asking for Robert Noyce's opinion, and Robert Noyce said, and then Gordon Moore said, well, what would someone else tell us from outside? And he said, oh, they would tell us to get out of the memory business. So Gordon Moore said, well, then why don't we be the ones from outside telling us that? And he said, huh. And I guess they got out of the memory business, and that lasted until now. And now we'll see where Intel goes next. But the take home is that every once in a while, you do have to pivot, even if you're a newer company. Intel was very young at the time. Pivots are not necessarily awful. Sharing the details with people when it's appropriate is a good idea. Here's a question for you. If you consider a pivot with your current idea or something you've been pondering that might turn into an idea, are you changing your fundamental principles by pursuing this idea? For example, you might agree completely with that school, with the zoning regulations and whatnot concerning how close you can place it. But I got a great property that's 1,000 feet from a school, and I've always wanted to open a liquor store. Everybody has dreams. If only we could change the rules, because I got the property, I got the money, and it's not going to worry. It's not going to cause problems for kids. It's not going to be a big deal. So you agreed with the principles initially because you're like, that makes sense. And but my own personal gain, my dream is to, are you changing your principles, or should you pivot to another idea or another location? Did you start out wanting to do great things and you pivot into something that will make you the most money regardless of how you reach those heights? I'll give a food truck example since I've been going down this road anyway. I have known food truck owners in my various activities in the past who always wanted to bring their concept to their hungry customers. And, people love to cook for other people. This is not an unusual thing. They wanted to start a restaurant. Restaurants are very expensive, so they started a food truck instead. That is not a change in principles. That's a change in implementation policy, right? Instead of purchasing or renting, leasing a physical property, I can spend less money. I can modify a food truck into something that looks and has the features I want. It looks the way I want, my brand, and I can enable my menu. I need a cooktop and whatever you need, right? So you spec it out and you build your food truck, and you can go to where your customers are. Somewhere along the way, you might say, I'm doing great. My customers love my food, but I could make more money if I start buying stuff from my local restaurant wholesale outlet and just drop it in a fryer, and I can sell. It's almost as good. I can skimp on ingredients, and I can take some shortcuts, and I'll have a higher profit margin. Have you now changed your principles? Have you changed why you got into the business initially? Because I want to make great food and share it with people and see their reactions and bring my recipes from my early days, like the food I grew up with. I want to share it with the world. Oh, but I can make more money if I just drop some stuff in a deep fryer. That's very different. And I've seen that too. And I got to be honest, from a personal perspective, it's always disappointing. Consider starting with why and continuing with why. Simon Sinek is rather famous for his start with why. It's a concept, it's a book, it's a TED Talk. The very first TED Talk I saw where he presented this, it was like an easel on a stage, and he was, I can't remember if he was drawing or if it was already drawn on there, but he talks about Apple and Dell and so on. So decide what the motivation might be for your endeavors, your business, your life, and pursue the principles to which that motivation points. He famously uses Apple and Apple products compared to those of Dell and Microsoft in that TED Talk, for example, suggesting that Apple likes to deliver great products and a great user experience, and that's their why, whereas companies like Dell and Microsoft, and so in his discussions and interactions with people from these companies, marketing and sales and so on, are focused on the market share and profit. So in his diagram, he shows why at the center of the Apple circle, I guess. The why is in the middle, and the what and the who and the other aspects of it are further away from that. So they're core principal values, right? Whereas at Dell or Microsoft, they're concerned about market share, they're concerned about profit margin, they're concerned about market dominance. They're not concerned about customer experience as much. Anybody who's ever used Windows knows this is true. So their center is what, maybe it's who or how much. And the why is really like, well, to make money, right? So that's his contention. And it's hard to argue with the way he presents it. I mean, Apple I don't think follows the same exact principles as they used to. Maybe that was a Steve Jobs thing, or maybe it was just the old ways and the world has become a very competitive place. I don't think it holds as true anymore for Apple. But at the time, this was in the time he was talking about, the time of when the iPod was coming out and the Zune music player, Zune. If you've never come across one of those, you're probably better off. So it was not exactly a modern era, maybe 20, 25 years ago. If we look at the Starbucks change in discount policy, did they implement a discount policy to bring back customers that stopped returning? That is to say, are they trying to get new customers? Are they trying to bring back customers that haven't been coming back so often? Or did they offer discounts to those who were still returning just to keep them, right? Oh, you're already here. Well, let's give you a price reduction so that you will come back again and spend that tiny little bit less money. But who were and are facing the same individual financial challenges. So that is, people that continue to come to Starbucks are in the same marketplace. The local economy, local effects on cost of living, and so on are being felt by everyone, obviously to different degrees based on their personal cost of living and their financial resources available and so on. But you're essentially looking at a pool of people and saying, well, you're coming here already, or maybe you stopped coming here. We're going to give everybody a price discount and we're going to see what happens. Both would enjoy this policy. But as they shift to a points benefit policy, that is to say, oh, if you spend money at our normal pricing, you're going to get loyalty points that you can add up over time and you'll get something later. Customers who are still coming to the store benefit from their spend. I'm spending money. I'm going to get my points. So that's fine. They were already coming. They were already coming regardless of the discount. So they're just loyal. They like the location. It's on their way to work. They bring their laptop. They have their meeting with their friends and they're working on a startup idea, whatever it is. It is an indirect marketing engagement to draw customers back, but also providing a different type of value to those who never left. So there are different ways to do it. Now, if you offer these points, and of course you're going to make a big deal, hey, now you get more loyalty points, or maybe they won't even make a big deal of it. It's a different way of attracting those customers who haven't been back in a while. So it's a potential for re-engagement and inviting them back into the store, not through a immediate cash discount, but from an aggregated loyalty discount, which says, hey, not only come back like you used to, but keep doing that. And then you'll get rewarded for that later. So that helps the bottom line today. And it doesn't necessarily push people away because, okay, I'm spending money like before, but I'm going to get something for it later. And if the company is transparent, and this has all been in the news, like, hey, we want to stay in business. So here's what we're doing. So none of this has been like hand waved, secret. And I'm sure Starbucks has their secrets. But the take home is if customers buy the story and they say, well, yeah, I like Starbucks products and I like to go in there, that's probably fine. They didn't change any of their fundamental core principles. They didn't change anything about who they'd like to service, which is everybody, and so on. So they're changing a pricing policy for the sake of the business, but not changing their principles for the sake of their shareholders, for example. So making profit is okay. Staying in business is okay. Changing the way you interoperate with humans, that's a bigger risk, and it doesn't appear that they're doing that. So that's nice for them. We can pull up one of the most famous declarations that slowly but surely faded away. No, not the one about independence. We know that one's long gone. The one from Google that said, quite simply, don't be evil. That changed in 2016, arguably before then. I don't recall exactly when, but there was always talk of like, hey, that don't be evil thing doesn't really appear so much anymore. And it kind of faded from any appearance on the Google websites and so on. In 2016, with their restructuring, the Alphabet companies, right? So Alphabet is a parent company and Google, and they have other companies, and I don't remember their names. Now their corporate code of conduct begins with do the right thing, which I believe is also a movie. Which many might contest as words more than deeds. I would agree with that. I think they talk a good game, but Google does many things that I think should be corrected, regulated more, not in the next couple of years, of course. Has Google, or now the overall parent Alphabet, changed its principles over its lifetime? It would be difficult to contend that they have not. As they've grown to take over and exert their influence over some areas, perhaps compromising personal privacy for profit, for example, which might be a part of their overall fiduciary responsibility. Stockholders are more important than people, which is another factor in maintaining those principles. So I personally think that they've really caved in. There's a Cory Doctorow premise that I've referred to often in my other audio programs. I may have referred to it in this one as well. I will simply say I clean it up a bit. I say it's impoopification. Generally, over time, as a company grows, it has to stop servicing its companies. Let's change it from don't be evil to do the right thing. Don't be evil sounds very vague, but it's generally optimistic. Do the right thing. For whom exactly? For our shareholders, of course. The impoopification timeline runs true like 100% of the time. It's unfortunate. We may be experiencing that now. So what to do, if anything? So what works and what doesn't? I think what works is having principles and doing what you want to do, or what you trying to accomplish, what you want to accomplish, keeping those principles in mind, using them as sort of a check, if you like, the rails on which you might operate your train of thought. So not everyone is so concerned with principles, though. Transactional engagements and solipsistic pursuits are becoming a norm, unfortunately. You may be observing the same thing. I've observed this most definitely. Perhaps this is more local in a person-to-person environment, but this may not be true, or it may become less and less true over time. That is to say, companies, you don't talk to someone at Google, you just interact with them. You use their search engine, maybe you use one of their phones, you look up stuff on Google Maps. You're not really interacting with a person, you're interacting with a product, or service. So their underlying principles don't really enter into the fray, whereas when you're interacting with a person or a local business where you walk in the place, or you generally visit their establishment, interact with the owners, the employees, and so on, you get a sense of where they are, what they're trying to accomplish, how they treat you, for example. Customer service. Yipes. It may or may not be true that for a company that they do care about these things, that they do operate from a principled stance. So when you do make a change, like don't be evil, dubiously sincere, do the right thing takes place with a little notice, right? They don't really put that up front on their website. Do the right thing. Search here. So the question is, do people notice? Are they even the slightest bit concerned? Is the population at large generally cynical enough to be apathetic? Or do they just have so many other things to be concerned about that they don't think about it until they have to think about it? Write down your principles, your reasons why, Simon Sinek, and surround yourself with others who not only buy into those ideals, especially if they're going to be working with you or for you, but who will point out when policies and actions might be deviating. Like, hey, I thought we said we were going to not be evil. And if the other person says, well, you don't have to work here anymore, that is something to think about. If principles were important in the beginning, they should stay that way. And if they really, really need to change, and there are valid reasons for this, I've kind of hinted at a couple, they're likely extreme and rare, but they may be equally valid despite being extreme and rare. So sometimes a principle, if there's a principle that you write down and when you're writing it down, you're like, I don't know about this one, but everybody else is doing it, so I guess it's okay. That one might be up for change. Consider those changes carefully, unless they weren't principles at all. If one of your principles is, we got to make as much money as possible, that's really more of I don't know, gluttony. Is that one of the 7 sins? Yeah, I believe it is. That's what I saw in a movie. Publish your principles for the world to see. This is more about business, though in the modern world of personal brand building and influencer social media, the principles of any individual are more and more on display and, usually, the source of popularity, or not, because their fans and followers often align with, are inspired by, and celebrate the principles of their team. Like, oh, I'm on team Hassan, or I'm on team Ethan, for example, right? And by the way, you could argue very reasonably, I think, that those two social media characters I just mentioned, and if you don't know who they are, that's fine, but they are operating from their individual principles that just don't mesh well. That's the nature of the game. If you stick to your principles, though, you're going to follow through. You don't sacrifice suddenly. Now, one of the two on the principles on which they disagree may discover at some point, like, the basis on which I base the principles that we disagree over turns out to have been different. I'm not really sure anymore if my principles were based on fact or truth, or maybe I misunderstood, or there was a misrepresentation, or the world has changed in general. So these things could happen. But from where I sit, and I really don't pay much attention to this, but there are examples where people who don't get along, it's because their principles don't align, or maybe it's just for the business of disagreement. You get more clicks that way. Either way, their team, it's when your fans and followers are like, oh, I'm on team this guy, oh, I'm on her team. And you end up with mindless drones that take out, like, oh, I'm gonna go harass this person in social media, or go to their house, or all kinds of. That's horrible. But this is the nature of, they call it parasocial relationships. I like the way they think. I like the way they look. I like what they say. I like what they're doing, etc. I'm going to be on their team, and I'm going to adapt my principles to support theirs. For example, now I'm not a social psychologist, but you can kind of see where that ends up. Now, individuals get called out all the time when they deviate. There is always the apology. So there's there's outrage, and they're trending, and there's people are weighing in on both sides. You can just watch. Philip DeFranco seems to be on top of these things and makes them very exciting in his descriptions. The world is blowing up. This is all over. Oh, the internet's not having that. So he kind of hypes up these skirmishes. And then somebody apologizes, and he'll comment on that. Half the population will disagree with the whole notion of an apology, and so on. There'll be public spanking, and then life goes on. This doesn't really happen at company scale, right? If a company, NDS in Florida, loses every single human being, living or dead's personally identifying information, social security number, email addresses, former residents, current residents, they just lost all of that stuff. There should be, they shouldn't be canceled. And I believe they are filing for bankruptcy, but there's the whole notion, they may have started their business. A principle might have been, hey, we should maintain the privacy and security of all the information we're gathering. And eventually that one slipped away. Probably a profit motive. But there's no responsibility taken for that radical deviation that led to a dramatic failure that impacts the blast radius of this one is everyone, right? The rebukes, the spanking, the cancellation, the change in marketplace stature for businesses and companies just doesn't change because it's inconvenient. It requires a certain amount of attention to be paid. And you can make the same argument about political figures or the action taken by local, state, federal government and so on. Like, hey, how come nobody's upset by that? Well, because everything today is more important than yesterday, and I got to go get my Starbucks loyalty points and so on. So none of these things really seem to matter, and likely will not. So all I can say at this point, do the right thing. So there you go. What a frustrating notion. I didn't really, when I was writing this, I wasn't thinking about it as much as when I'm saying it, but it is very disappointing that most business is about profit. It's not necessarily principled. Maybe Starbucks is principled. I mean, really, at the end of the day, they have their fiduciary responsibility to their shareholders. They got to make money. Are they doing it for good reasons? Are they going to change, like, well, we can make money, but also serve our communities or follow our core values or adhere to the principles on which this company was founded? Maybe. You can see in the news today, The Onion, many times people don't know they're reading The Onion, but they find out later, has purchased InfoWars. And so there will be all kinds of drama about that. The Onion, I actually met Baratunde Thurston, I think that's his name, one of the original or early days Onion writers. Their reason for doing what they were doing is very like intellectual humor. They're very creative with their satirical articles. But of course, with all satire, you are trying to make a point. So there were some Onion articles that were entertaining, creative, and did make a point. Others were definitely out to make a point by being entertaining and creative. But generally speaking, and by the way, I used to pick up the print edition of the Onion on my way walking to work when I worked at Salon in San Francisco. Those might be collector items if I still had them, which I don't. For a very small, very specific collector. But I think in buying InfoWars, which had its own completely different agenda and set of principles, there's a certain amount of production by street. There's a certain amount of irony, of course, and angst, and it's making headlines and so on. But it will be interesting to see what would happen with this example of the Onion's principles probably have not changed, and they'll simply direct some of their humor, creative satire, and so on through this new brand. Or maybe they'll just throw it away. Not sure. We'll see what happens. The principles of InfoWars probably have changed over the years. Maybe. I don't know. I don't know about that, the whole thing. Occasionally interesting. Some certainly noteworthy details would emerge from the basement of InfoWars, but that whole platform became very weird. I think Alex Jones is interesting in Scanner Darkly. Other than that, it's hard to say. Anyway, interesting times ahead. I hope principles remain intact in many places, and I hope people make a bigger deal about adhering to them. I hope people do the right thing, as Google might suggest, and I hope people pay attention to that and pay attention when people do not do the right thing. And I hope the memory of the population stops getting shorter and starts becoming a little bit more detailed, maybe a little bit more attention paid. We'll see. That is what needs to change. Can it happen? I don't know, but don't forget, do the right thing.